unaware his wife was pregnant with triplets and starting a billionaire business. He divorced her. The bells of Ashbourne rang that morning, not in celebration, but in judgment. The Duke of Ashbourne, Lord Cedric Hawthorne, stood in the grand hall of his manor, his cloak heavy with silence, his gaze colder than the marble beneath his boots. Before him knelt his wife, Duchess Evelina. The candles flickered between them, painting her tear-streaked face in gold and shadow. "It's over," Cedric said, his voice as sharp as a drawn blade. "I will not live another day chained to a barren woman." Evelina's hands trembled against her gown. Her lips parted, but no sound came. For months, she had felt the whispers gathering, the Duke's late nights, the lingering scent of another woman on his cloak, the eyes of servants that dared not meet hers. Now the truth stood unmasked. He turned his back to her. "Lady Marissa is to be my wife before the season ends. Pack your belongings and leave this house. You have no claim to it." The words sliced through her heart. Barren woman. If only he knew. For weeks, Evelina had hidden her condition, uncertain, afraid to hope. But the physician had confirmed it only yesterday. She was with child. No, not one child. 3. Triplets. A rare blessing, the kind that came once in a generation. But now, what joy could such news bring? He would not listen. He would not believe. The Duke had long stopped seeing her as wife or partner. To him, she was an obstacle, one to be removed so that his ambitions might grow unchecked. As his boots echoed away, Evelina rose slowly, her back straight though her heart shattered. The servants watched in silence as she walked through the great doors of Ashbourne, the home she had built with her own hands, the halls she had filled with warmth and laughter. The winter wind bit at her face as the gates closed behind her. She had nothing. No title, no protection, no husband. Only a secret life stirring within her, and the faint spark of something that burned too quietly to die. Resolve. Weeks passed. She found refuge in a small coastal estate that once belonged to her mother's family, long abandoned, now reclaimed. The sea became her witness, its endless rhythm reminding her that life could be rebuilt. Evelina worked tirelessly. She sold her jewels, traded her silks, and used the gold to buy land. Small at first, then more. She had always been clever with accounts, far more than Cedric had ever credited. In the markets, she used her maiden name, hiding her rank. She founded a trade venture that dealt in fine fabrics and rare herbs, managing shipments and correspondence herself. As her belly grew, so did her business. By the time her children came into the world, 3 tiny miracles, all crying at once, her name was whispered in merchant halls and port towns alike. Lady Evelina of the Coast, the mysterious noblewoman who turned ruin into fortune. And far away, in the glittering halls of Ashbourne, Cedric toasted his new wife, blind to the empire his former Duchess was quietly building. The first winter in exile was cruel. The winds from the sea tore through the cliffs, rattling the shutters of the old manor Evelina had claimed as her home. Yet within its cracked walls, a fire burned, not just in the hearth, but in her spirit. She would not bow to pity. Each morning, she rose before dawn, overseeing deliveries, learning the trades of sailors, and writing letters under candlelight. Her hands, once soft with luxury, bore ink stains and calluses. When her body ached, she remembered Cedric's words, "barren woman," and found strength in her fury. By the spring thaw, her efforts bore fruit. Merchants spoke of her fairness and precision. The fabric she imported was unmatched, the herbs she sold sought by apothecaries and nobles alike. She never revealed her name, only signing her letters with the seal of a silver hawk, a quiet defiance to the house that had cast her out. And then, one stormy night, the pains came. The midwife arrived just in time, her hands trembling as thunder shook the walls. Evelina labored for hours, her strength fading with each cry until 3 wails rose into the air, one after another, like the chords of a long-forgotten song. 2 boys and a girl. She named them Adrian, Lucian, and Alara, children of light, born in the darkest hour of her life. When she first held them, their warmth filled the void Cedric had left behind. "You are my empire now," she whispered through tears. But she kept their existence hidden. The world believed her gone, and she wanted it that way. To protect her children, she let her name fade into rumor. Her business, however, flourished under its new banner, Hawk Trade Company. The irony was not lost on her. Meanwhile, in Ashbourne, things began to unravel. Cedric's new wife, Lady Marissa, had promised charm and ambition, but she hungered for more than status. Within months, the coffers began to drain. Lavish feasts, endless gowns, and gifts for foreign courtiers. Her appetite knew no bounds. The Duke, too proud to admit error, borrowed against his estates. The debts grew. At night, when he looked across the table and saw not loyalty but greed reflected in her eyes, he thought, though he would never admit it, of Evelina, of her quiet patience, her grace, her intelligence. But by then, she was a ghost in his memory, a chapter he had closed without remorse. 3 years passed. In that time, Evelina's trade empire expanded beyond the coast. Her ships sailed under the sigil of the Silver Hawk from one kingdom to the next. Her name, or rather, her pseudonym, became synonymous with prosperity. Nobles who once looked down on merchants now sought her contracts. She wore no crown, yet she held more power than most lords could dream of. At night, after the twins were asleep, she would walk the shoreline, watching the horizon. Sometimes she wondered if Cedric still ruled Ashbourne with that same cold pride, or if his choices had finally caught up with him. She told herself it didn't matter. She had built her world anew. But fate, relentless and cruelly poetic, was already weaving their paths together once more. Ashbourne was not what it once had been. Once a symbol of strength and prestige, it had grown hollow, grand on the outside, but rotting within. The Duke's debts whispered through every tavern and trading post. Ships bearing his crest returned half empty, his alliances crumbling as fast as his pride. Lady Marissa, now his wife, no longer pretended affection. She mocked him openly at banquets, spending his fortune on jewels and silks while whispering in the ears of other noblemen. "The Duke of Ashbourne," she would sneer behind her fan. "A man who can no longer afford his own name." But worse than her cruelty was the truth he tried to ignore. Ashbourne was on the verge of ruin. When word reached him of a new trade empire rising along the coast, the Hawk Trade Company, Cedric dismissed it at first. "Another merchant fattened by luck," he said, waving it off. But as months passed, he could not deny the reports. Their ships now controlled 3 ports he once taxed. Their caravans moved under protection of nobles once sworn to him. His steward urged him to form an alliance. "This hawk woman commands a fortune, my lord. If we do not strike a partnership soon, we will be at her mercy." Cedric clenched his jaw. "I will not bow to a merchant." But desperation erodes pride. Within weeks, envoys were sent. Letters followed. And finally, one arrived, sealed with silver wax bearing the emblem of a soaring hawk. The words were formal, direct. "To His Grace, the Duke of Ashbourne, the Hawk Trade Company acknowledges your proposal for alliance and wishes to discuss terms in person. Should you find yourself willing to negotiate with respect, our representatives await your presence at the coastal manor of Windermere. Signed, E. Hawk." Cedric's eyes lingered on that last line. The handwriting was elegant, familiar, but it could not be. She was gone. Still, curiosity won. Within days, he rode to Windermere with a small escort. The manor stood proud against the sea, white stone gleaming under a storm-gray sky. It was the kind of estate a merchant could never afford, Yet here it was, rivaling his own. Inside, servants moved with quiet precision. The air smelled of lavender and sea salt. He was led to the great hall, where a woman stood at the window, her back to him, her gown of deep blue silk flowing like water. "Lady Hawke," he said, his voice tight with skepticism. She turned, and the world fell away. Evelina. Her hair was longer now, streaked with gold by the sun, her bearing serene, her eyes neither soft nor cruel, only calm. She looked at him not as a wife wronged, but as an equal who had long surpassed him. "Your Grace?" she greeted, her tone polite but distant. "I trust your journey was pleasant." He could not speak. For years he had imagined her broken, forgotten, buried under his ambition. Yet here she stood, radiant, powerful, untouchable. When he finally found his voice, it was hoarse. You're the merchant?" "I am the founder of the Hawke Company," she replied simply, "and the mother of your children." The words struck like thunder. For a heartbeat, he thought he'd misheard. "Children?" "Triplets," she said, her expression unreadable. "Born 3 winters past. You left before the physician could tell you." He staggered, breath caught between disbelief and guilt. "You never sent word?" She tilted her head slightly. "Would you have listened?" Silence fell, broken only by the sound of waves crashing against the cliffs below. He looked at her then, truly looked, and saw what he had thrown away. Not just a wife, but a woman of rare strength, one who had built an empire from the ashes of betrayal. For the first time in his life, the Duke of Ashbourne bowed his head. For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind from the sea slipped through the open windows, carrying with it the sound of gulls and distant waves, a reminder that time moved on, even when hearts could not. Evelina broke the silence first. "You came to negotiate, not to reminisce. Let us speak of terms." Cedric straightened, trying to recover his composure, though the ground beneath him felt unfamiliar. He had walked into that hall expecting to tower over a merchant. Instead, he found himself before a sovereign in everything but name. She gestured toward the table where ledgers and maps were spread across polished oak. "The Hawke Company is prepared to take control of your shipping routes in exchange for a share of your exports. The percentages, however, will not favor you." Her tone was smooth, impersonal. The voice of a businesswoman, not the wife he had once humiliated before his entire household. Cedric clenched his jaw. "You speak to me as if I were a stranger." Evelina's eyes met his. "Aren't you?" The words cut deeper than he cared to admit. He looked down at the parchment she had pushed toward him. The figures were ruthless, but fair, far better than any other trader would offer to a duke so indebted. Still, pride burned in his throat. "You think I need charity?" "I think," she said quietly, "that you finally understand what it means to lose everything you once took for granted." Her gaze lingered on him for a heartbeat before she turned away, studying the maps. "Do not misunderstand me, Cedric. I built this company not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. You made it clear that I had no place in your world, so I created one of my own." He wanted to speak, to apologize, to rage, to undo what could not be undone. But every word seemed small before her strength. When he finally found his voice, it was rough. "And the children?" "They know who they are," she replied, "but they do not know you. They think their father died before they were born. It seemed kinder that way." He took a step closer, his voice trembling despite himself. "Let me see them." Evelina turned to face him fully then, and for the first time he saw the fire beneath her calm. "No." The refusal hung heavy in the air. "You had your chance to be a father, Cedric. You traded it for ambition, for a woman who valued your name more than your soul. My children will not suffer because of your regret." He swallowed hard. "You would punish them by denying them their father?" "I would protect them," she said firmly. "You mistake distance for cruelty. What I learned from you is that love without protection is just another kind of neglect." Her words landed like iron. The Duke stared at her, seeing the truth he had long buried. She had always been stronger than he, not because of titles or wealth, but because she had endured what would have destroyed others, and she had done it alone. Finally, he bowed his head. "If you will not forgive me, then let me at least make amends. Ashbourne is drowning. My people will starve if I do nothing. Help me save them." Evelina studied him for a long time. Her expression softened, if only slightly. "For the sake of your people, not for you, I will help. But understand this, I am no longer your Duchess. You will sign the agreement as equals, not as lord and subject." She slid the parchment toward him once more. "You will not address me as wife. You will call me by my name, or by my title, Lady Hawke." He hesitated, pride warring with humility, then reached for the quill. His hand shook as he signed. When it was done, she took the document, pressed her seal into the wax, and looked up at him with finality. "Now, you may leave, Your Grace." He lingered in the doorway, his heart heavy. "Evelina, I don't deserve it, but someday I hope you'll allow them to know me." Her voice was quiet, steady. "Perhaps, when they no longer need protection from the man who broke their mother." And with that, the Duke of Ashbourne, once a man who commanded armies and kingdoms, left the hall of the woman who had surpassed him in every way. The partnership between the House of Ashbourne and the Hawke Trade Company changed everything. Within months, ships once idle under the Duke's crest were filled again, not with tribute or borrowed wealth, but with Evelina's goods, her merchants, her workers. The ports reopened, the coffers filled. And though Cedric's pride stung with every ledger he signed, he could not deny the truth. Her hand had saved what his had destroyed. But it was not only gold that began to return to Ashbourne. It was dignity. Every fortnight, Evelina sent shipments herself to ensure proper accounting. She never came alone. 3 small figures always accompanied her, watched closely by guards and servants. Cedric saw them first from afar, playing near the docks, their laughter cutting through the wind. He didn't need anyone to tell him who they were. Triplets, 2 boys and a girl, the same dark hair and green eyes he once saw in the mirror. They ran barefoot along the wooden planks, chasing gulls, their giggles carried by the sea breeze. He could not move. For years, he had buried the thought of fatherhood beneath ambition and guilt, convincing himself that his choice had freed him from weakness. But as he watched those children, his children, the illusion crumbled. He began to find reasons to linger whenever Evelina's ships arrived, always from a distance, always pretending to inspect the cargo. Sometimes the girl would notice him and wave, mistaking him for a dock worker. The smallest boy would grin at him, a grin that struck something deep in his chest, something he thought long dead. Evelina noticed, of course. Her eyes followed him each time, cautious, unreadable. One afternoon, after the children had gone inside, Cedric approached her. "You've built an empire," he said softly. "They look happy." "They are," she replied, her tone polite but firm. "Happier than they would have been at Ashbourne. I would never harm them," he said quickly. She turned to face him. "You already did. You harmed them before they were even born. You made them bastards in name, though they carry your blood." Her words were daggers, but they were true. He lowered his head. "Then let me try to mend what I broke. I don't ask for forgiveness, only the chance to be near them." Evelina hesitated. The sea wind lifted her hair, and for a fleeting moment, he saw the woman he had once loved, before greed and pride had turned her heart cold toward him. "You may see them," she said finally, "but not as their father. They know only that you are an ally of their mother. You will not reveal the truth until I decide they are ready." He nodded without hesitation. "I accept." And so it began, their fragile truce, built on silence and the ghosts of what once was. Each visit grew longer. Cedric brought gifts, small carved animals, books, seashells from distant shores. The children adored him, never suspecting why he watched them with such aching tenderness. The little girl, Ilara, once tugged on his sleeve and asked, "Will you come back next time, sir?" He had to look away before he could answer. "If your mother allows it, I will." Evelina observed him from afar, her heart torn. She had vowed never to let him close enough to wound them, but as weeks turned into months, she began to see a man changed. The arrogance was gone. The sharpness in his voice had softened. He laughed with them, knelt beside them, listened. One evening, after the children had fallen asleep, he approached her once more. "You don't owe me kindness, Evelina, but if you could see what they've done to me, you would know I am not the same man who left you." Her reply came slowly. "I believe you've changed, Cedric, but repentance is not redemption. One heals the soul, the other earns trust. The first you've done, the second will take time." He bowed his head. "Then I will wait." And for once, he meant it. The summer trade season arrived with both promise and peril. The seas were restless, storms brewing earlier than usual, and rumors spread of raiders along the coast, desperate men who plundered merchant vessels. Evelina had always relied on careful planning and trusted captains, but even she could not command the wind. When word reached her that one of her largest shipments, silk bound for the royal court, had vanished at sea, her composure shattered for the first time in years. That cargo represented months of labor, hundreds of workers, and the security of her trade routes. In her private study, she stood over the maps, candles burning low, her fingers pressed to her temples. "If I lose this shipment, I lose my contracts with the crown," she whispered. "And if I lose those, the company falls." Cedric, who had come to deliver reports from Ashbourne, watched her silently. It startled him, seeing her shaken. She had always been unbreakable, the very image of control. But now, he saw the toll that leadership exacted, the same burden he had once carried, though with none of her grace. He stepped closer. "How many men were on that ship?" 40, she said, her voice heavy. "And my best captain." He hesitated. "Allow me to send my own fleet after them." She turned sharply. "No, you are not part of my company." "I am your ally," he countered. "And whether you accept it or not, I owe you everything. You saved Ashbourne when I could not." Her jaw tightened. "And you think risking your men will repay that debt?" "No," he said quietly. "I think it will prove that I'm not the same man who abandoned his family when they needed him." Their eyes met across the table, the silence thick between them. Evelina wanted to refuse, to protect herself from hope. But in his gaze, she saw something that hadn't been there before. Not pride, not ambition, but devotion. "Very well," she said at last. "But if you go, you do so under my command." He smiled faintly. "As you wish, Lady Hawke." Within days, the Duke's ships sailed under her banner. The sea, however, showed no mercy. The storm that struck was the worst in a decade. Weeks passed without word. Every dawn, Evelina stood on the cliffs with her children beside her, searching the horizon for sails that never appeared. The merchants grew restless. Investors demanded answers. and whispers began to circulate. The Hawk Company is finished. But Evelina refused to believe it. He'll return, she told the children, even when her heart doubted. He must. Then, on the 14th day, the watchtower bell rang. Sails, torn but upright, appeared on the horizon. When the fleet reached the docks, the crew was battered but alive. The stolen cargo had been reclaimed, the raiders defeated, and standing at the prow of the lead ship was Cedric Hawthorne. His cloak was shredded, his face weathered by salt and battle, but his eyes, those proud, familiar eyes, burned with life. He stepped onto the pier to a crowd of cheering sailors. Evelina pushed through them, her breath catching when she saw him alive. "You're mad," she said, her voice trembling between anger and relief. He smiled faintly. "You're welcome." She wanted to strike him, to scold him for risking his life. But instead, tears spilled down her cheeks. "You could have died." "I would have, if it meant keeping what you built," he said. "You once told me I didn't know how to protect those I loved. I wanted to prove you wrong." For the first time, she could not speak. Behind her, the children ran forward, laughing, calling for him. Cedric knelt instinctively, opening his arms. They crashed into him with the trust only innocence knows. He closed his eyes, overwhelmed by their touch, their warmth, their existence. And Evelina watched, something within her finally breaking. Not from pain, but from the quiet collapse of the walls she had built around her heart. In the days following Cedric's return, word of his bravery spread like wildfire. Merchants sang of how the Duke of Ashbourne had fought pirates in a storm to save Lady Hawke's fleet. The tale grew in every retelling, a fallen noble who had redeemed himself in salt and fire. But for Evelina, the story was not of legend. It was of truth. She had watched him nearly lose his life for her sake, for their children's future. And something in her heart, long frozen, began to thaw. He recovered in her home, the manor that once belonged solely to her. She insisted it was only so he could heal under her physician's care. But every day, she found herself lingering longer in the doorway when she brought him tea. The man in her chambers was no longer the cold duke she once knew. He laughed with the servants, played chess with her eldest son, and told stories to Alara until she fell asleep in his arms. Evelina often stood unseen by the door, her heart betraying her discipline. One night, she found him by the window, gazing out at the dark sea. His leg was still bandaged, his face marked by exhaustion, but his voice was soft. "I used to think power was control," he said, "that ruling others was strength. But now I see power as the ability to protect what truly matters. You always understood that. I was the fool." She remained silent. The candlelight flickered between them, painting his regret across the walls. "You've built more than an empire, Evelina," he continued. "You've built a life that deserves to be envied, and I destroyed the one we had before I ever realized what it was worth." Her eyes glistened. "Regret doesn't undo wounds, Cedric." "No," he agreed, "but it can keep them from being repeated." For the first time in years, she didn't walk away. She stood beside him, watching the sea. The silence between them wasn't cold anymore. Days turned into weeks. Cedric recovered, but when it came time to leave, he hesitated. The children clung to him. Alara, bold as ever, tugged on Evelina's skirts. "Can he stay, Mama? Just until the next storm?" Evelina's composure wavered. "The Duke has his own home, my dear." Cedric knelt, his gaze full of quiet longing. "Perhaps. One day that home can be here." Evelina turned away, her voice trembling. "Do not make promises you may not keep." He rose slowly. "I made one long ago, to protect my family. I intend to keep it now, even if it takes a lifetime to prove." and so he left, but not to the comfort of his estate. Cedric began repairing what years of arrogance had destroyed. He visited the poor he had overtaxed, rebuilt the villages that had fallen under his neglect, and dismissed every corrupt steward in his court. Slowly, Ashbourne changed. The Duke, who had once ruled by fear, became a leader, loved for his humility. Letters arrived for Evelina every week, updates of his work, signed only, "For our children's future." She never replied, but she kept every one of them in a drawer beside her bed. One spring morning, the triplets ran into her study shouting, "Mama, Mama, the Duke is coming!" She froze, the letter she'd been reading slipping from her hand. When she looked outside, she saw his carriage cresting the hill, not with guards or banners, but alone. Her heart, despite everything, quickened. When Cedric stepped down, the children rushed to him, unashamed, shouting "Father," for the first time. Evelina's breath caught. She hadn't told them. She never had. He knelt, gathering them close, tears shining in his eyes. "Your mother didn't want you to know until I'd earned the right," he said softly. "I can only hope I've begun to." Evelina stood in the doorway, unable to move. The man who had once broken her spirit was now on his knees before the very family he'd abandoned. And she, the woman he'd cast aside, held the power to forgive or to end it forever. She stepped toward him slowly, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Perhaps it's time they know the truth, not of who you were, but of who you've become." The announcement of the Duke's return to Windermere spread swiftly through the coastal town. Merchants whispered, servants gossiped, and even the sailors paused their work to catch a glimpse of the man who had once ruled through fear, but now walked humbly beside the woman who had built her own kingdom. Evelina greeted him with calm poise when he arrived at the great hall, though her heart trembled in ways her face refused to show. The children, however, knew no restraint. They surrounded Cedric with the eager questions and laughter only youth could summon. "Will you live with us now?" asked Lucian, the boldest of the three. "Do you ride horses, father?" Adrian chimed in. Ilara, ever observant, looked between them both. "You make Mama smile more than before." Evelina turned away at that, pretending to straighten a vase, but Cedric saw the flush rise in her cheeks. He smiled, not with triumph, but gratitude. In the following weeks, he remained at Windermere, not as a guest nor as a duke, but as a man rebuilding what pride had once ruined. Together, he and Evelina worked side by side, merging the affairs of Ashbourne and the Hawk Company into one. He spent mornings with the children and afternoons overseeing trade agreements. At dusk, they would walk along the cliffs where their story had begun anew. There were no grand declarations, no rehearsed apologies, only shared silence, heavy with everything they both understood now. One evening, as the sun dipped into the horizon, Cedric turned to her. "Do you ever wonder if things might have been different had I listened?" She glanced at him, her eyes softening. "I used to, but I've learned that pain can be a teacher, not a curse. Without it, neither of us would have become who we are." He nodded slowly. "Then allow me to prove that the man I am now deserves the life he once lost." Evelina hesitated. She had sworn never to need him again, never to risk her heart. But when she looked at the children playing nearby, their laughter echoing against the sea, she realized forgiveness wasn't weakness. It was strength of the rarest kind. "Then prove it," she said quietly. "Not with words, with time." He took her hand gently, as though it might vanish if he held it too tightly. "I'll give you both." Weeks passed. The Duke of Ashbourne began to host gatherings once more, but this time in partnership with Lady Hawke. Invitations were sent across the kingdom. Nobles, merchants, and royals alike arrived to witness the impossible. A union built not from power, but redemption. During the banquet, Cedric stood beside Evelina, his hand steady in hers as he addressed the crowd. "Years ago," he began, "I believed nobility was inherited, that titles and blood defined our worth. But I was wrong. True nobility is earned through humility, perseverance, and love that endures even when the world forgets you." He turned to Evelina. "Before all who once doubted you, and before those who never knew what you suffered, I ask your forgiveness, not as a duke to his duchess, but as a man to the woman who taught him what grace truly means." The hall fell silent. Every eye turned to her. Evelina stepped forward, her voice calm but resonant. "Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is remembering without hatred. The man before me is not the one who left me in the cold, and for that, I forgive." The applause that followed was not merely for them, but for the story their lives had become, a tale of ruin turned into renewal. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the candles burned low, Cedric found her in the garden, standing beneath the moonlight. "Do you still wish for me to prove it?" he asked softly. Evelina turned to him, a faint smile touching her lips. "You already have." He took her hand again, but this time she didn't pull away. And under the silver glow of the night sky, surrounded by the scent of lavender and salt, the Duke and Duchess of Ashbourne found their way back to each other, not as the people they once were, but as the souls they had become. Years passed, and the world changed with them. The Union of Ashbourne and the Hawk Company became a model for all of the realm, not merely in trade, but in governance, charity, and peace. Under Evelina's vision and Cedric's renewed integrity, their lands flourished. What had once been a story of betrayal became one of rebirth, whispered in courts and marketplaces alike as the house that was rebuilt by love. The triplets grew quickly, each child bearing fragments of both their parents. Adrian inherited his mother's intellect and patience, often found studying maps and trade ledgers by candlelight. Lucian carried his father's courage and fire, training with the Knights of Ashbourne, always restless and bold. And Alara, with her mother's heart and her father's stubborn will, became the light of their home. Her laughter the echo of a peace long fought for. Evelina sometimes watched them from the terrace overlooking the gardens, and thought of the night she had walked away from everything. How strange it felt now, to stand surrounded by the life she had once believed lost forever. Her journey had not erased the pain of the past. It had transformed it, carving strength where weakness had once lived. Cedric joined her one evening as dusk colored the horizon in gold and violet. "Do you ever regret forgiving me?" he asked quietly. She smiled faintly. "Regret? No. It wasn't mercy I gave you. It was truth. We both learned what love is only after it cost us everything." He nodded, his eyes lingering on the children running across the fields. "And do you think they'll ever understand what it took to bring us here?" "One day," she said, "when they too learn that love is not born from perfection, but from endurance." He reached for her hand, not in possession, but in reverence. "You taught me that the greatest empires are not built from stone or gold. They're built from forgiveness." She looked at him, and this time her eyes softened completely. "And you taught me that redemption is not found in apologies, but in action." They stood together in silence, the sea breeze brushing against their faces. For the first time, the sound of the waves no longer reminded them of separation, but of constancy, the rhythm of life that carried on no matter how deep the wounds. Years later, when the children had grown and the realm had entered an age of prosperity, storytellers would gather in the villages to speak of the Duchess who had risen from ruin and the Duke who had learned humility through loss. But few knew the truth of how deeply they had both bled before healing, or how close they had come to destroying each other. Evelina's name became legend Women spoke of her as a symbol of resilience, the Duchess who turned heartbreak into fortune, the woman who proved that strength could wear a kind face. And beside her name, always, was his, Cedric Hawthorne, the Duke who learned to love too late, and then spent the rest of his life proving that late did not mean never. In their final years, they often sat together on the same cliffs where she had once stood alone, pregnant and exiled, watching the sea. Now she sat beside him, their hands intertwined, their hearts finally at peace. The gulls wheeled above, the waves rolled below, and their story, once steeped in betrayal, had become a testament to grace. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of amber light, Evelina turned to him and said, "Do you remember what you told me when we first met again?" Cedric smiled, eyes still on the horizon. "That I came to negotiate." She laughed softly. "And you did, in a way. You just didn't know the terms yet." He chuckled, his voice warm with memory. "I'd sign them again 1,000 times over." Her smile lingered, tender and knowing. "As would I." And as the last light of day faded into the calm of evening, their story, once written in heartbreak, ended not with tragedy, but with truth. That even after betrayal, after distance, after the silence of years, love can still return, not as the fire that once burned, but as the light that endures. True greatness is not measured by titles, nor wealth, nor the victories of pride. It is found in the courage to rebuild what you've broken, in the strength to forgive, and in the grace to begin again, even when the world believes it's too late.